Hey, everybody. Appreciate you
What's
watching.
going on, fam?
Welcome to the second part of our three-part mini-series of reshifting the landscape or shifting the college football landscape. We've titled this one The Trio of Blue Bloods because if you didn't watch last episode, and this is the first one you're watching, basically what this mini-series is we're talking about how all parity was obliterated by the Saban era at Alabama, and what are some of the things that need to happen in order for the college football landscape to be rebalanced. And we talked about how the coaching cycle this past year of 2022, some of the hires that were made could create the perfect storm to sort of rebalance the national landscape. That way we don't already know who's going to be playing for a national title week 0 of the season, but we might actually have a competitive, parity-esque college football landscape where I'm not going to say it's anybody's to win, but it's
at least five teams.
Yeah, it's a much broader field of competitors instead of just Bama and then whoever that other team's going to be, you know, whether it's Georgia, whether it's Clemson, whether it's Ohio State. I mean, it's like, week 0. Well, let's get back to the days where teams like Georgia Tech and Colorado were splitting a national title. A team like Kansas State was playing. And it's not because those teams were just overly dominant and elite, though they were very good, but it's because the landscape of college football during those time frames was a little bit more balanced. So, well, not a little bit more, much more balanced.
Way more.
So let's get into the trio, the tri-head. Who is it that we're talking about? We've talking about Notre Dame, OU, and Texas. Okay, obviously Texas that coach was brought in last year, not this most recent cycle. But if you look at Freeman and Venables and what it appears they're going to be able to do with their respective programs, combined with what Sark allegedly is going to do at Texas or is doing at Texas, if those three teams can become genuine national championship competitors, again, not these flash in the pan, great season just to get blown out in the playoff. I mean, genuine national championship contenders. I'm talking the OU of the early 2000s. I'm talking Texas in the Vince Young years. I'm talking Notre Dame. Well, unfortunately for them, the late 80s. However, if you look at what Freeman's doing on the recruiting trail,
I'm
not saying they haven't competed for one. I'm not saying they haven't played for one. I'm saying they haven't really truly competed for one. They got blown out by Bama. They got blown out by Clemson. I mean, the guys haven't won a New Year's Six game in like a decade and a half, I think, maybe even longer. Hadn't won a national title since the 80s. But if you look at what Freeman's doing on the recruiting trail, he might just be able to bring in the caliber of players that aren't just able to have a successful regular season, but might also be able to make some noise once they get into that top 4. So let me ask you, B. Holmes, what would it do to the national landscape for these three teams to get back to that level of competition? And then once you kind of talk about how that will impact the landscape, I'm going to kind of talk through what I think each team needs to do to get to that level.
What it would mean for each three teams? Well, I think, and I don't want to dive too much into what you're going to kind of talk about, what Notre Dame, we know Notre Dame's thing. It's, are they ever going to lax up on academic standards? I think that's just always going to kind of be there. Not saying don't crucify me. Not saying because you're smart you can't play football. Like I'm not saying that. I'm just wondering if they're going to ever lax up on some of the admission standards because it's hard. Notre Dame is one of the few schools in the country that you have to qualify as a regular student before you can compete academically. But what I think this means is it kind of shifts the landscape. I think I'm going to go on a ledge and say Notre Dame is more important than the other two.
Okay.
Because of Texas and OU's jump to the SEC, in my opinion, they've kind of lost, not that they lost credibility, but what they really could do to shift the landscape of college football is, not saying it's not important, I don't think it could be as impactful as a Notre Dame. Because now what happens if Texas or OU wins, it goes back to the SEC is the most dominant football. It's the same thing. I think Notre Dame winning, though, I think that's a way bigger shift in the landscape of college football. Making them competitive changes the game because right now, if we're being honest, every recruit that these kids that are getting recruited now, all they've ever really known is SEC dominance. All they known is Bama, Georgia,
Clemson,
Clemson, maybe Ohio State, maybe Ohio State. And what do they think? Oh, man, if I want to play the best football, I go to the SEC. If Notre Dame now becomes nationally competitive, where they're like really competitive in the postseason, that changes some things. Now, I think they kind of need some help with that. Like they need like Ohio State and Michigan to kind of stay as 11 and 12 win teams and also competing, in the postseason or, at the New Year's and winning. I think that helps. But if Notre Dame does that, I think it now shifts these kids' mindset like, oh, you don't have to go to the SEC to be dominant. You can actually go up north. You can go play where it's cold. You can go, you don't have to, be in football country to be dominant. So do I think if Texas and OU get good, it's great for the sport? Yes. I mean, you always love when Texas is good. You like when OU's good. I think and OU's been fair. They've been good for a while, so I'm not going to say that they're not. It's good for the sport. I think Notre Dame becoming competitive is the best for this. Is the best for college football because now you're actually shifting. You're shifting some of the competitiveness a little bit more above the Mason-Dixon line. So now you have, if we're just being frank, and I'm just kind of laying this out there. Yes, you'll still have the SEC, and the SEC is dominant. They'll always be dominant. But now, if Notre Dame's good, you have Notre Dame. You have Michigan. You have Ohio State. We'll see what Fickell continuously does with Cincinnati now that they're moving to a Power 5 conference. Penn State's still going to be kind of competitive. You have this cluster of teams that can come out and make it a little bit more competitive where kids are now saying, maybe I don't have to go to the SEC to be good. I can actually go up to one of these teams and we can actually be competitive. So I think Notre Dame's success brings a little bit more credibility, even though they're not a part of the Big Ten. I think it helps overall, and now you're getting a greater crop of kids that will now leave the lower tier to come up north, which the only time those kids ever do that is if they go to Ohio State.
Okay. Well said. So let me kind of go through rapid fire what I think each team is on the cusp of doing that will allow them to, or what they need to do to get back to that elite. I'm going to start with OU because I don't want to say they're not already elite. They're similar to Notre Dame, what I just said about Notre Dame, where they can win their conference, at least being in the Big 12. They can get in the CFP, but they really, to this point, haven't been able to make any noise once they get there. I think the stat, I had it here, in their CFP games, they're 0-3, and they've given up an average 54 points a game.
Ooh.
What I believe Venables is going to do in Norman is turn them into what Clemson has been in recent history. What is Clemson? Let's look at that. What was their path to success? Well, obviously they had first-round quarterbacks, so I can't take that away from them. And Venables is going to have to go find one, right? He may not have that this year, but I bet he gets one in there. Yeah. But it was their defense. It was that Clemson defense. Sure, I know the year with Deshaun Watson when they won I think they ended up having like a shootout with Bama to win that first one. But that next one, when they essentially blew Bama out with a freshman quarterback, that whole season and that title was off the strength of and anchored by their defense. And I think Venables at OU can build and attract the same level of talent there to build that type of defense that he had at Clemson. And if OU can do what Clemson has done in recent history as far as bringing in that level of talent, developing that level of talent, particularly on the defensive side of the ball, and producing those types of results, it's going to have that much more of a sustainable impact at a school like OU opposed to Clemson because the football history is so much richer. There's so much more tradition. It's a way more passionate fan base. It's a way more bought in just overall culture and atmosphere in general. I mean, they've been on the forefront of the whole NIL deal with trying to initiate different initiatives and things like that to connect student athletes with places of business, potential NIL investors and things like that, or whatever you call them. I don't know if you call them an NIL investor, but a company that wants to give an NIL deal. Yeah. I would call that an investor, but whatever. They're investing in a kid's talent. But they're trying to put these different tools and avenues in place to connect their kids with those opportunities. And so If Venables can rebuild that defense, they don't need to have the sexy Lincoln Riley offense that they've had. Sure, they need a good offense. They need an explosive offense, and they will have one. Right now, he's got Levy in there, who's been under Lane Kiffin for the past couple of years, who did a great job for the most part at Ole Miss. They're going to have to find that quarterback. But I think really this first couple of years, it's going to be all about reestablishing the defensive culture. And that's what's going to get a team like OU back into the national, not just conversation, because they've been in the national conversation, but it's really going to take them to that next step of, hey, we're not just competing to get in the playoffs so that we can give up 54 points and lose, but we're actually going to get in the playoffs and we're expecting to win. We're expecting to win not just our playoff game, but the national championship. So that's for them. I think for Notre Dame, you kind of already touched on it, but it's about bringing in the caliber of talent that won't just win an independent schedule, right? But that can actually get in the playoffs and make some noise. I think Marcus Freeman has that personality. I think he has that ability, and I think he's going to have plenty of money around him ready to step up to the plate to initiate and grant deals for these top athletes. He's just going to have to prove that he can translate it to wins on the field, because as I've gone on record to say before, I do think sometimes he was brought in on like a trial year, and that if he didn't reach a certain threshold that they were going to go all in on trying to hire Urban Meyer again. Maybe third time will be a charm. But I think that one of the things they're going to strongly need to consider is joining a conference. Whether it's the ACC, whether it's the Big Ten, whether it's going and being the flagship school of the Big 12 and turning them back into, I mean, that ain't going to happen. But I'm just saying, maybe consider the ACC or the Big Ten getting in a conference. That way you're used to playing, you know, some of those, at least a blue blood team or two a year, playing a conference schedule instead of, they kind of spend most of their season playing all these mid-tier teams. And then it's like they get to the playoffs, and that's the first time they've really seen that level of competition. And then for Texas, and then I'll close this out, but like they just got to get out of their own way.
Facts.
I mean, these dudes are going to bring in high-end talent. They're going
every year. Can
they develop it? Can they get a draft pick? Arkansas basketball put more players in the NFL than Texas football this past season. That is ridiculous.
That's sad.
If you're a Longhorn fan. And you look at how they've been recruiting. The problem is the Longhorns have kind of become like the Dallas Cowboys of college football. All their fans, all their boosters, all their support system believes every single year that they're going to win it all. Oh, this is the year. This is the year. This is the year. And then they roll out and go 7-6, or they roll out and go 5-7, or maybe they go 8-5, whatever it is. They have all this talent. But now, now they got Sark. They got a Saban disciple.
Quinn Ewers,
he brought in Quinn Ewers. And so my thing is okay, prove it. You have everything. You literally have everything you need. Can you get out of your own way? Can these puppet masters that are around the program get out of the way and allow the coaches to coach, the players to play, and the culture to be established? Because, I mean, unless Vince Young comes walking back through that door, who can literally single-handedly just carry a team to a national championship. Now, that's not fair to say, because that team was absolutely loaded with talent. But without Vince Young, they ain't winning a championship.
Right.
So I shouldn't say single-handedly, because in fact, we're going to have someone from that team on this podcast coming up, so y'all stay tuned. But they were just loaded. And they had Mac Brown, who knew how to play the political game, who knew how to handle But, I mean, really, since then, what have they done other than underachieve? And really, since they let Mac Brown go, they've done great in recruiting. And then it's like, oh, we got Charlie Strong now. They gave him 3 years, cut him.
3 years.
Oh, we went and got the sexy hire and Tom Herman at the time. He's gonna bring us back. Oh, give him a few years, he's out. Now they got Sark in. Sark had I think the worst losing streak that Texas has had since the 50s. But it wasn't his fault. It was all the coaches before him's fault. Now he's getting his guys in. So it's the same story every year for Texas. I do believe they've got the financial support they need. They have the facilities. They have the talent. They have the support. I mean, they literally have everything, but can they get out of their own way? And if these three teams can really start to dominate in college football, I mean, getting back to the top Texas players, it coming down to Texas and OU. Notre Dame starting to dip into some of that talent over there in Pennsylvania and Ohio, and then getting down, snagging some kids out of Florida. You know, last video, if you watched it, we talked about the U coming back and how that would impact. Man, these three teams, not only would it just be wonderful for college football in general, but my goodness, we would have so much parity in the game. It would just be fun. So,
well, the only way Texas can do that, and then I'm done. You know who I think they should go get. Completely don't like the guy, but I've been calling it, and I've been saying it. If Texas wants to be back, there's only one person I believe that can do it. It's Urban Meyer. Now I'll leave you with that.